Sonia Sodha, chief leader writer with The Observer, and by the comedian Mark Dolan. Very good morning to you all. I'd say plenty there, even in that alone. Well, there we heard it explicitly, didn't we, Mark? There, Nick Clegg saying he'll work with Tony, as I said, some kind of noughties tribute band put back together. Tony
well,
and Nick.
No, I mean, obviously you could sort of solicit suggestions of names. I'm thinking Wrong Direction, but of course that's just a matter of opinion. I mean, I think it's really interesting because there's a clear message from Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems, who are, you know, I mean, Nick Clegg's had a good week. When did you last say that sentence? And there's a message from those victorious Lib Dems, which is, we don't want a hard Brexit. And actually, clear messages on Brexit are absent elsewhere. In a sense, these sort of defunct, unemployed politicians are offering leadership. John Major's piped up, and Tony Blair's back in the scene, and so is Nick Clegg. Whereas the incumbents seem confused. I mean, you just interviewed Boris Johnson, who I think, because when he first sort of deliberated about whether he wanted us to leave the EU or not, pre-referendum, we had that few days, and we was like looking for smoke signals from the chimney. Where's he going to go? And it seemed like he wanted us to leave. But now he's Foreign Secretary, I'm confused, because this week he said that actually free movement might not be such a bad thing, or at least that's the allegation. You interviewed him. He seemed like he was going to leave the interview halfway through, and then he came back on camera again. So there's a lot of confusion. It reflects a government that are seemingly making up foreign policy on the hoof.
So what do you think, Sonia? I mean, first of all, on the old-timers, I mean, not old, but you know, their political time has come and gone, it seems. Could they reinvent themselves?
I might buy Wrong Direction's best hits, I think. I'd certainly be up for that. Well, I think you saw Nick Clegg there looking very cheerful, probably the most cheerful you've seen him in a very long time. And I think I actually agree with him. He's right that there is this sort of, you know, the idea that the EU referendum was going to sort of put to bed these issues once and for all. Actually, it's opened up a whole new dimension in British politics, you know, out versus in, Brexit versus hard Brexit versus soft Brexit. And that does seem to be the defining political force at the moment. And you've got these two small parties, the Lib Dems and UKIP. We saw the Lib Dems defy expectations last week in Richmond. This week you've got the Sleaford by-election coming up. Now UKIP haven't got a hope in winning it, but what everyone will be looking for will be whether UKIP can, you know, leapfrog Labour into second place. So you've got these two smaller parties with very clear stances, and then you've got Labour, which is in a total mess over Brexit and what its position is, and really struggling to keep together the sort of coalition of voters, some of whom feel very passionately about staying in the EU, some who feel equally passionately about leaving. And then the government is in a complete mess, as Mark's just said. And we've had, you know, all sorts of briefing. I mean, David Davis saying, you know, we would pay in to stay into the single market.
Or did he? I mean, this is the thing, is, you know, we're told, I mean, just bringing Chris here, you know, we're told no running commentary. Well, we seem to get a running commentary by leak, innuendo, and whisper. We get all kinds of different things. Boris Johnson, is he in favour of free movement of people or not? You know, all this is milling around. Would it be better for the government, let's say post the decision by the Supreme Court early next year, to say these are actually the broad areas that we are going to ask for?
Obviously, as a journalist, you're frustrated on one level that the government simply isn't prepared to set out its ultimate objectives, but you also have to recognise that as an observer of politics and indeed business negotiations, that's not a practical thing to do. But you know, David Davis's comment on the fact that Britain may end up paying something into the EU in order to retain some kind of access isn't actually a shock revelation. There are a number of mechanisms that you could achieve that by. You could pay into an Erasmus student programme, you could pay into Eastern Europe Development Fund. Some people do this.
And just with your City AM hat on, I mean, it's only a discussion I had with some senior figure from the city, said, well, we could pay the money for passporting. You know, we seem to get fined a few billion every year by the government. You know, the government would have to pay, we'd pay for those passporting rights.
Yeah, I think that's right. When we're talking about putting some kind of financial contribution on the table in order to retain some kind of access to the single market, then obviously some kind of negotiation that results in one party paying to achieve access is perfectly acceptable part of it. But there is, of course, the frustration that we don't know the full details. And I think that's something that people are going to have to recognise, that the government's position is a holding position, which is we're not going to give a running commentary, and neither, by the way, is the European Union.
I do think there's a problem with all of this, though. So, all the commentary at the moment is about what Britain would like, and the government doesn't seem to be paying any attention to the fact some of the stuff might not be on offer. The pick and choose model, where you're like, oh, I'll have a bit of that.
What do you mean might not be? We've been
told
told explicitly it's not.
Well,
But that is how
exactly,
negotiation works, isn't it? You have to have a position A, which is your preferred set of options, and you have to have a position C, D, or E that you're prepared to fall back on, which might be, by the way, a so-called hard Brexit, WTO, trading rules and tariffs. The government should, if you want to put some clarity on the situation, the government should also make it clear, yes, we're after this, but by the way, we can deal with this. This end of the,
that's the point,
spectrum
Mark.
is okay.
On this issue, Mark, this is the elephant in our room. In the rooms of the other 27, it goes down to mouse size in certain countries because they've got, Austria, the far right, Italy, France, and Germany.
Of course. And we saw it again this week with the surprise by-election result. Democracy rears its ugly head. And events may be very defining in this whole Brexit debate, because if there are strong right-wing Eurosceptic forces sweeping through the continent, that weakens Brussels' hand, I'd suggest.
Or indeed left-wing Eurosceptic forces, which includes the Liberal Democrats. So it doesn't include the Liberal Democrats, but it certainly includes the forces at play in the Italian referendum and the five-star movement.
One thing I think might be missing, Dermot, though, is actual political leadership in this country, because I think what you have in Theresa May is probably a very able administrative type of figure who spent a long time in the Home Office getting on with the job. In fact, getting on with the job is one of her catchphrases. I think on this occasion, she's going to have to go a bit more showbiz and a bit more presentational, because what's happening is that an absence of any noise from Number 10 about where we're going is producing a vacuum, and into that vacuum, any comment from any cabinet minister is being seized upon, affecting the markets. So she's going to have to make more speeches where she says nothing, which is what some previous prime ministers have been very good at doing.
Week's other big news, developing from yesterday onwards, Donald Trump and the Taiwanese president, Sonia. What's wrong with talking to the Taiwanese president? It's upset the Chinese, but, they're not a democracy.
Well, because it does change, 40, 50 years of American foreign policy. And it seems that President-elect Trump, just thinks that these things can be sort of changed at the drop of a hat. He sort of sent quite an aggressive tweet afterwards, which is his style at the moment in terms of letting the world know what he thinks, where he said, hey, what's the problem with this? He called me to congratulate me. But it's quite an extraordinary state of affairs that this is the way that sort of we're getting hints about foreign policy of the future American administration. And we're actually seeing some, the Taiwanese government has briefed that actually it was a Trump advisor who sort of set up the call. Trump's now said, oh no, the Taiwanese president called me. It's really unedifying.
But it's the broad point. Given, Christian, the history of Britain and China, many people saying, we've bent over backwards too many times to curry favour with them. There's Donald Trump, okay, much more powerful nation, but saying, look, I can talk to the Taiwanese president. At least she's elected.
Indeed. It has come to something when voices of the left, or indeed just Trump's broad opponents, are using the fact that he risks angering a communist dictatorship by taking a phone call from a democracy. If people are going to criticise Trump for that, I accept the broader point about upsetting an apple cart of sort of 40 years of reasonably settled and quite well maintained and staged relations in that part of the world. But this is the sort of thing that Trump might well find that he just wants to do. And it's also the case that if the call did come through to Trump, this is how most leaders around the world finally got hold of presidents-electors. They just called his hotel switchboard and the call gets put through.
Or indeed his personal mobile.
I think what happens is, when you've had a few drinks and you start texting the wrong people you shouldn't be texting. That's basically Trump's.
Something you do often, Mark?
That's his last night. That's Trump's foreign policy. Something, the sort of shoot from the hip improv style was great for his campaigning. He said a different thing every day. I think he's going to find in office that every time he says something, we actually take it seriously now. It affects the balance of international relations, and I think he's going to very quickly learn the hard way that this isn't going to work.
Yeah, it's just not the way to do foreign policy, is it? You said that you've got people on the left criticising. There is a way. Fair enough. If you want to sort of think about changing the course of US foreign policy, that's great. The way to do it isn't like this.
Bear in mind that Trump has made no secret of the fact that if you look at the things he has said about China, admittedly in the terms of trade and economics when it comes into the US, he has made, this is not as if he's suddenly turning course and saying, actually, I've got a thing or two to say about China. He's made no bones about it, doesn't like them very much. There are people around him who said that his team knew exactly what they were doing with this.
And of course, he famously doesn't drink. Christian, Sonia, Mark, thank you all very much indeed. Very good to see you. Where did that time go? go. You're watching Moynihan on Sky News. Coming up.